In today's video, we're breaking down 5 of the most stupid Grand Canyon deaths ever recorded. From a survivalist who attempted a freezing river crossing for a shortcut to an influencer whose desperate need for a perfect critter selfie ended with her name added to the canyon's growing list of fatalities. It was May 18th, 2016. Near Pipe Creek Beach along the Colorado River, the afternoon looked deceptively calm. The water moved with a steady surface glide beneath bright desert light. Heat pressed down from the canyon walls, and the long climb back to the south rim waited above. Evan Klein was 29, a warehouse supervisor from Flagstaff who filmed weekend survival challenges for a small YouTube channel. He built his content around dismissing safety advice as exaggeration. Co-workers described him as competitive, especially when he could prove others wrong on camera. He had completed several rim-to-river hikes and owned decent camping gear, but he had no river training, no swiftwater course, no experience swimming in current, and no understanding of dam-controlled flow. The Colorado River remains between 46 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Mid-channel currents commonly move 6 to 8 miles per hour. Rangers and guides repeatedly warn hikers not to attempt crossings. By mid-afternoon at Pipe Creek Beach, sand temperatures were above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The Bright Angel Trail climb ahead meant nearly 10 miles and 4,400 feet of elevation gain. Instead of starting up, Evan aimed his camera toward the opposite bank and claimed he could save hours by crossing and climbing out from there. No marked trail was visible across the river. Warning boards nearby referenced cold shock, strong current, and drowning. Rafting groups eddied downstream. His friends reminded him that the maintained trail was the only exit, but he insisted he had a way to manage the cold water. From his backpack, he pulled 2 large contractor-grade trash bags and wrapped them around his torso, sealing them with duct tape to trap heat. He inflated a 3rd trash bag as makeshift flotation and clipped it to his pack. He kept his hiking shoes on, saying the weight would help him cut through the current. He wore cargo shorts and a chest-mounted action camera. He did not secure the plastic around his arms or test the current beyond ankle depth. He stepped in slowly. At knee depth, he reacted to the cold. At waist depth, his breathing changed. Instead of backing out, he leaned forward and pushed off into a swim. The cold shock response hit immediately. Witnesses heard a short shout, cut off mid-breath. The plastic bags collapsed as water displaced trapped air. His mouth opened as his head snapped back, drawing in river water. His breathing became rapid and uncontrolled. The current caught him broadside within seconds. The loosely clipped, air-filled bag tore free and drifted away. The taped plastic tightened across his chest and restricted arm movement. His backpack shifted and pulled him off balance. Soaked clothing and shoes increased drag. He tried to stroke toward the far bank, but drifted downstream instead. About 20 feet from shore, his head went under. He resurfaced coughing, then slipped beneath again. Downstream, a partially submerged cottonwood trunk extended into the deeper current. From shore, it blended with glare. The flow carried him directly into it. Recovered footage later showed brown turbulence, a sudden jolt, and wood filling the frame as his chest struck the trunk while the current forced his lower body downstream. Rafters saw the impact, and a guide called for help by satellite phone. The current pinned his torso against the wood. The taped plastic constricted as he struggled. Each attempt to lift his head forced him back under. Within seconds, his movements weakened before the river rolled him free downstream. River rangers launched but lost sight of him around a bend. Search crews continued until dusk. His body was recovered the next morning, about 2 miles downstream, caught against rocks in slower water. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death to be drowning. Sudden immersion in 48-degree water triggered involuntary gasping and early water inhalation before the current overwhelmed him. Sand and silt were found in his lungs. His camera was recovered on a sandbar. The final footage showed his entry, the collapse of the improvised flotation, rapid breathing distress, and entrapment. The case was later referenced in river safety briefings as an example of how ignoring a marked trail and relying on plastic insulation can turn fatal within a minute. But swimming across a dam-controlled river wasn't the only way someone tried to outsmart the canyon. 2 years earlier, another visitor decided gravity itself was just another rule he didn't need to respect. It was September 3rd, 2014. Yavapai Point on the south rim of the Grand Canyon lay under a full moon, open to visitors at all hours. The stone overlooked quiet, except for wind rising from the canyon. Beyond the railing, the land dropped several hundred feet to sloped rock and broken talus below. Marcus Bell was 35, a retail store manager from Phoenix. His job was routine: closing registers, locking cases, turning off lights. Over time, he began consuming extreme sports videos and telling coworkers that the athletes were not exceptional, just willing to ignore rules others feared. He had never skydived, never taken canopy training, never exited an aircraft. 2 weeks before the trip, he bought a used base rig from an online seller who described it as ready to jump. The exchange took place in a grocery store parking lot. Marcus paid cash and left without asking about canopy age, line condition, or prior jumps. At home, he practiced putting on the harness while watching short tutorials. He never completed a supervised line check, never performed a proper hanging harness test, and never deployed the canopy in a controlled setting. He repacked it repeatedly on his apartment floor, assuming neat folding equaled competence. Base jumping requires training in exit force, body position, canopy heading control, and emergency procedures. Yavapai Point is underhung, meaning the cliff curves inward below the rim. Jumpers must push aggressively outward to clear the wall. Marcus did not account for that detail. He told his friend Tyler that gravity would carry him far enough. Because base jumping is illegal in Grand Canyon National Park, he chose 3 a.m. to avoid rangers. He parked in a public lot, concealed the rig in a gym bag, and climbed over the barrier at 3:12 a.m. Tyler stood about 50 feet back with a handheld thermal camera to record. Marcus took no running start. The thermal footage shows him stepping forward casually. His heat signature drops almost straight down with minimal outward projection. Instead of clearing the wall, he fell along the inward curving limestone. Within seconds, he deployed the pilot chute too close to the rock. Base canopies inflate rapidly at low altitude. On thermal footage, a bright bloom expands as the canopy opens directly against the cliff. The nylon scraped across limestone and briefly snagged on a protruding edge. Marcus swung forward and struck the wall chest first. Investigators later documented scuff marks and canopy fibers at that location. Under uneven load and misalignment, the canopy tore. The lines twisted. The fabric failed. The thermal image shows his heat signature separating from the canopy and accelerating downward. He fell several hundred feet onto talus rock below. The footage captures a rapid descent, followed by stillness at impact. Tyler stepped back from the rim and called 911 at 3:16 a.m. Rangers arrived within 20 minutes, but delayed descent until daylight due to terrain risk. At 7:40 a.m., Marcus was located on broken rock near the base of the wall. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death massive blunt force trauma. The fall shattered his pelvis and spine, fractured multiple ribs, and caused a catastrophic skull fracture with severe brain injury. The injuries were consistent with immediate loss of consciousness and rapid death on impact. Inspection of the rig revealed uneven line stows, improper bridle routing, and inconsistent packing. No manufacturing defect was found. Investigators concluded the fatal sequence resulted from an illegal jump, no formal training, improper canopy packing, failure to account for the underhung wall, and minimal exit force. The thermal footage was logged as evidence and briefly circulated online before being removed. Park officials later referenced the case in enforcement briefings, emphasizing that unauthorized jumps by untrained individuals repeatedly produce similar outcomes. Marcus's death was ruled accidental. The decisions leading to it were intentional. Investigators concluded the fatal sequence resulted from an illegal jump, zero formal training, improper canopy packing, failure to account for the underhung wall, and minimal exit force. The chain of decisions was deliberate, but cliffs weren't the only high points people treated like props. On the North Rim, during a storm that rangers were actively clearing, someone else decided the safest place to stand was exactly where lightning was most likely to strike. It was July 22, 2017. Bright Angel Point on the North Rim narrowed into exposed rock as monsoon clouds stacked overhead. Thunder was no longer distant. It rolled directly above the canyon. Rangers were actively clearing the overlook, guiding visitors walking back toward the shelter when the thunder stopped sounding distant. Daniel Rios stayed behind. At 34, the freelance photographer from Albuquerque had built an online identity around getting closer to storms than anyone else. He had no meteorology training and no lightning safety education. His income depended on dramatic proximity images. In the months leading up to that day, engagement on his pages had dropped. He had begun adding captions mocking tourist evacuations during storms, presenting himself as someone willing to stand closer than everyone else. North Rim monsoon storms develop quickly when heated rock forces moist air upward. Bright Angel Point is a narrow promontory with steep drop-offs on 3 sides and limited tree cover. During active lightning, high, isolated points are especially dangerous because electrical discharge seeks the most direct path to ground. When the interval between flash and thunder drops below 5 seconds, the strike is within roughly 1 mile. That afternoon, lightning advisories were issued through park channels. Rangers instructed visitors to leave exposed areas. Witnesses later confirmed that Daniel initially walked back with the crowd, but then stepped away from the paved path and returned to the overlook once a ranger moved on to clear another group. Rain began falling in heavy bursts, turning the limestone slick. Thunder and lightning became nearly simultaneous. Several visitors reported feeling static in the air and seeing hair rise on their arms. Daniel set up a small tripod briefly, then changed his mind, deciding it did not look dramatic enough. He switched to a 6-foot metal selfie stick with his phone attached and extended it fully overhead to elevate the camera above the stone guardrail. He stood upright near the outer curve of the point, one of the highest silhouettes on the promontory. A couple about 30 yards away began recording him after noticing he had returned despite evacuation instructions. Their footage shows Daniel laughing, arms raised, metal pole pointed straight into dark cloud cover as rain intensified. He adjusted his stance twice to keep the phone steady, remaining fully exposed. The strike occurred within seconds. The lightning either hit the raised pole directly or struck the rock immediately adjacent. Electrical current traveled through the conductive pole into his hands and down through his body into the wet limestone beneath his boots. His body locked rigid in full muscular contraction. The couple's video shows the pole snap sideways and Daniel collapses backward flat against the stone. One shoe was thrown several feet during the contraction. The phone detached from the pole and slid across the wet surface, still recording until it came to rest against the guardrail. Emergency services were called immediately. Ranger EMTs began CPR and applied a defibrillator, which showed a non-shockable rhythm consistent with cardiac arrest from lightning. An ambulance arrived about 12 minutes later. After prolonged resuscitation efforts without a pulse, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death a lightning strike. The electrical surge stopped his heart instantly. Minor burns were documented on his hands and feet, along with faint Lichtenberg patterns. Video confirmed he had returned to the exposed point after being told to leave and raised a metal pole during active lightning. Park officials later used the case in safety briefings and reinforced lightning warning signage. We've got more Grand Canyon disasters ahead, so subscribe if you want to see how a single reckless decision at the rim can turn an ordinary visit into a fatal mistake in seconds. It was April 10, 2015. Sunrise lit the stone around Desert View Watchtower on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Wind moved steadily across the exposed rim, lifting dust and pushing at clothing. Visitors stayed near the railings, but open rock shelves beyond them remained accessible. That was where Noah Patel, 25 and a yoga instructor from San Diego, decided the background would look strongest. Noah taught vinyasa classes near Ocean Beach and relied on social media to fill workshops. His page featured handstands on beaches, rooftops, and boulders. He marketed the poses as proof of control in any environment. The more dramatic the backdrop, the more engagement he received. His balance training came from indoor studios with flat floors and climate control. He had no climbing background and no experience assessing fall exposure. The Grand Canyon rim is primarily limestone that breaks down into loose grit and pebble-sized fragments. Spring winds regularly gust above 20 miles per hour along exposed sections, accelerating unpredictably over the edge. National Weather Service data that morning recorded sustained winds near 18 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 25 to 30 miles per hour along exposed rim areas. Rangers advised visitors to stay clear of the edges due to the conditions. Noah stepped beyond a low stone barrier east of the watchtower onto a closed, unprotected rock shelf where the terrain dropped sharply into ledges and talus. Instead of setting up well back from the edge, he repositioned several times to bring the canyon fully into frame behind him. He placed his tripod about 5 to 6 feet from the rim, but then walked forward until his hands would be less than 2 feet from the drop. The shot required the illusion that he was suspended directly over open space. The ground surface consisted of compacted limestone with a thin layer of loose sand and scattered gravel. Witnesses later said he used his shoe to push aside several small stones, but did not test the stability of the surface under full body weight. He checked the camera preview, adjusted framing again, and stepped into position. He bent forward and planted both palms near the edge. Without pausing to reset footing or reassess wind, he kicked upward into a handstand. The tripod recording shows an initial vertical alignment that lasted approximately 4 seconds. His legs were straightened together, toes pointed toward the sky. A gust struck from his left. His hips shifted off center. Instead of coming down safely, he attempted to fight the wind and hold the pose. He pressed harder through his fingertips, increasing the downward force through his right palm. The loose grit beneath that hand began to slide toward the rim. The footage shows his right hand shifting roughly 2 inches. His shoulders trembled as he tried to restack his body over unstable contact points. Another gust hit. His legs separated slightly in an attempt to counterbalance. His right elbow bent under load. Gravel displaced again. For about 3 seconds, he attempted to recover rather than exit the pose. His left palm then slipped on fine sand. With both hands compromised and his center of mass beyond his base of support, his torso rotated sideways. His lower body cleared the rim first. The tripod captured his body tilting out of frame. Nearby visitors heard a brief cry that ended abruptly. He fell approximately 130 feet, striking a slanted rock ledge before sliding into a steep slope of broken stone. A visitor dialed 911 within a minute. Local rangers arrived at the rim in 8 minutes, located him with binoculars, and a technical rescue team was later mobilized to establish anchors and descend by rope. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death blunt force trauma from a high fall, with a severe skull fracture, traumatic brain injury, upper cervical spine damage, and multiple rib and internal organ injuries consistent with high-velocity impact. The injuries were unsurvivable. The tripod remained upright and captured the full sequence, later collected as evidence and used in safety briefings on wind exposure and unstable rim surfaces. The death was ruled accidental, with park officials emphasizing that stepping beyond guardrails and performing balance stunts near exposed edges creates extreme fall risk during gusting conditions. Rangers reiterated that stepping beyond guardrails near exposed edges creates a severe fall risk, especially in shifting wind. But not every deadly choice involves stunts. Sometimes it was simpler, feeding a wild animal inches from a cliff and assuming nothing would happen. It was June 2nd, 2013. At Mather Point on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, visitors moved between guardrails and exposed limestone shelves. Beyond the railing gaps, the ground dropped sharply into layered rock and broken ledges. Lena Brooks was 21, a photography student from Henderson, Nevada. She worked part-time at a print shop and was building a wildlife portfolio for transfer applications. She understood lighting and framing, but had no training in wildlife behavior or rim safety. Her social media featured close animal shots taken at close range. Rock squirrels at the Grand Canyon cause more reported injuries than any other animal in the park. They are aggressive around food and will lunge. Signs at Mather Point warn visitors not to feed wildlife and to remain behind railings. Rangers regularly issue citations for feeding animals. That morning, temperatures were rising into the upper 80s. Lena noticed a squirrel moving between visitors near the rim. Instead of photographing it from a distance, she climbed over a low stone wall marked with warning signs and entered a closed, exposed rock section. She set her backpack down near the edge. She lowered herself onto the limestone within arm's reach of a steep drop. The surface sloped slightly toward open air and was coated in loose sand and small fragments. She positioned her phone behind her on burst mode and extended her legs outward toward the canyon. To lure the squirrel, she placed pieces of granola on her palm. When it hesitated, she leaned forward, shifting closer to the edge to remove background distractions. Witnesses later said she repositioned twice, moving inches nearer to open space. The squirrel lunged and clamped onto her thumb and part of her palm. Witnesses heard her scream. Blood appeared immediately. The animal released and jumped back. She jerked her arm backward and tried to stand at the same time. The motion shifted her weight behind her heels. Her left foot slid on loose grit. Limestone fragments displaced under pressure. Investigators later documented disturbed sand and scuff marks less than a foot from the rim. 2 nearby visitors saw her stumble backward. She stepped again to recover, but there was no ground behind her. Her heel crossed the edge. Her torso tilted sharply. She flailed once and fell backward over the rim. Witnesses heard her scream as she dropped. Small rocks broke loose and fell with her. Search teams later determined she struck a sloped rock face approximately 130 feet below before tumbling onto a narrow ledge. A bystander called emergency services at 10:42 a.m. Rangers arrived within 8 minutes and secured the area. Due to the steep terrain, a rope rescue team descended later that day and confirmed she had no signs of life. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death blunt force trauma from a high fall. The impact caused multiple fractures, including a fracture at the upper cervical spine that severed the spinal cord, stopping breathing and heart function immediately. Additional chest and abdominal injuries were consistent with high-speed impact against rock. The squirrel bite was a deep puncture, but not life-threatening. Investigators concluded that feeding wildlife and sitting inches from an unprotected drop directly led to the fall. Her phone remained on the rim. Burst mode captured the squirrel lunging, her recoil, and then empty sky as she disappeared. The death was ruled accidental, but preventable. It was attributed to feeding wildlife and stepping beyond guardrails into a closed area near the edge. Park officials reinforced wildlife enforcement at Mather Point and later referenced the case in safety briefings. Her photography program displayed several of her landscape images in a campus exhibit. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.